It's a real pleasure to welcome Tara James to the Caring CEO. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you for having me.
Tara, what does care in the workplace mean to you?
Well, for me, care in the workplace is about creating an environment where people essentially feel safe and valued. And it's really the foundation for well-being and performance. So care, I think, is shown through consideration and consciousness, and that relates to actions and outcomes. So it's really how we interact with our team, the impact we have on the environment around us and broader society. And of course, a big part of that is about creating psychological safety.
Yeah. And how do you go about doing that? Do you have any particular method or is it intuitive? How do you make people feel safe?
Well, I think there's a few parts to that. Creating the space, I think, is important. So, psychological safety as a leader, particularly, so myself and also the leaders I work with, a big part of that is demonstrating a safe and inclusive environment. So, with psychological safety, encouraging people to speak up. So if there is a problem, they feel safe to be able to speak up and raise their voice. And maybe it may not be the opinion of everybody, but that's often sometimes the those brave ones to speak up is important. And that's where coming back to performance, that's how we can improve as a team, as a company, and make that impact.
Yes, no one has all the information and all the knowledge these days, and we really need to tap into the wisdom and knowledge of the team. And people don't feel comfortable to do that if they're quickly dismissed, or people roll their eyes, or they don't accept an opinion. And there's many, many examples of big physical disasters when that has happened, plane crashes, issues with, sea petroleum extraction, really physical ones, but also
Mm,
lots of ones from a psychological perspective as well.
exactly.
Who did you learn to do that from, do you think? Or is it something you just picked up intuitively?
I'd love to say it was all intuitive, but I definitely can't claim that. I'm very fortunate to work alongside an organizational psychologist and leadership specialist at Small Amati. So Torben Silstein is definitely has taught me a lot over the last 10 years. And I've been fortunate enough to pass that on to a lot of clients as well. Some of the things I've learned. One of the key things that sort of sticks in my mind is he says that if you can't take care of yourself, you can't be anything for others. And I think as leaders, that's really important because there tends to be a high focus on team well-being and care. However, if leaders who are essentially leading those teams, if they can't take care of themselves, if they're not looking after their own well-being, things start to fall apart. So I would love it if that sort of conversation was a bit more balanced, and that conversation at, for example, board levels in leadership meetings, it was made a bit more comfortable, a bit more open to be able to share these challenges.
Yeah, my new book, Great Leaders Care, which is coming out on April the 1st, excuse the plug, but it talks about three elements of care, what I call a great leaders care mindset. And the first aspect is self-care, making sure we have fuel in our own tank, which you just described.
Yeah.
Crew care, which is about building psychologically safe and engaged teams. And red zone care, which is being able to identify and support those that are struggling. And there is a lot of struggling going on right now. Recently, Wiley, just in December 2025, found that there was 37% of employees severely stressed, but it was 46% of managers severely stressed.
Yeah.
And, it can be incredibly hard as a manager or leader trying to keep things going, but making sure you take time for yourself, which, you've just really spoken very eloquently about.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. And I see that a lot in the work that I do, that managers, CEOs, and it's correct when they say it's tough at the top because it is can often be quite isolating. And that's why it's important to build a network around you and establish it early so you can have that sparring partner and understand what you need as an individual to become resilient, which is absolutely very key to this.
Yeah. What do you do for your self-care?
Like I said, it's very individual. So the things that I look to do when I need to have a bit more balance is simply break up the day with going for a walk, getting outside, getting some fresh air, being around people that I feel comfortable with talking because as leaders, you obviously can't often talk about the challenges you're facing at work with your team. So being able to surround yourself with that support network is definitely important.
Yeah, actually, I was just speaking with my wife earlier on. She's a professor in cancer epidemiology, and they've got an overseas delegation visiting them today, and it's been rock solid. And she called me about 30 minutes ago and said, I've just got to walk outside around the Oval. I'm going to get some fresh air because
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm really feeling it. And,
Yeah.
even those small breaks can make a difference, can't they?
Absolutely. And I think also recognizing when you need to take those breaks. So earlier when you're talking about your book and the elements within that, I think a big part of that is emotional intelligence. So
Mm.
as a leader, understanding and having that self-insight and self-awareness is probably two of the most valuable tools you could have. And
Yeah.
especially if you can then teach your team how to develop emotional intelligence, then you know you can spot the cues before it becomes a big issue, and then we end up with what we're seeing a lot out there is burnout and fatigue, and obviously that has a lot of impacts not just on the team but on the company. So it affects performance, mistakes happen, and yeah, some terrible consequences can occur, like you mentioned.
Yeah. I interviewed Bob Borstein in my previous book, Back from the Brink, and he lives with bipolar, but he also was the director of public policy with Google based in Washington. And he said that you have to learn to be your own therapist. And he wasn't dismissing, the need for professional help, far from it. But he just said that, you have to learn to catch yourself early, know your own early warning signs and take corrective action. And I've
Mm.
had some, severe bouts of depression in my life, and I know how important it is to catch it early now and
Yeah, absolutely.
and take corrective action. And for
Mm.
me, that includes a lot of regular exercise, catching up with, good friends, and I guess also feeling a sense of purpose. And, in a very fast-moving world, purpose is important, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. It's a big part of well-functioning teams. So there's been quite a lot of research around that topic, and having that common sense of purpose can create, I guess, a more harmonious team, but a much more enthusiastic. There's research being done where reduced absenteeism, people become more creative thinking, they feel safe to speak up, like we are just discussing. So yeah, multiple benefits of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. I had looked through your LinkedIn profile and saw you had just written an article about 2026. Clarity, not urgency, will define global leadership. What
Yes.
what do you mean by that?
Yes, I think for the last many years there's been a focus on growth. So seems to be growth for the sake of growth's sake, but that of course burns out people, culture, and purpose. So what I believe now we need more than ever to navigate sort of this time of uncertainty, rapid change. And of course it's not all bad. There's a lot of technology adoption, AI adoption, there's lots of exciting things happening, but the pace is fast. So what effective leadership requires is clarity. And a term I often use is hurry up slowly.
I
Sorry.
like that.
So what I mean by that is move decisively, but never faster than your own thinking. So take pause before rushing and going. I've often seen people or a phrase like, "I'll quickly smash this out," or "I'm so busy," or those sorts of phrases. It's just encouraging people just to take a moment, because often when you do get caught up in the speed and rushing, it obviously causes a lot of stress, anxiety, and that has a ripple effect through the whole organization. And often it does end up costing the organization. So mistakes happen or reruns need people don't listen as carefully with that clarity. And then we will need to have reruns and repeat, which can
Yeah,
have costs.
yeah. I think that's so true. And I often, when I do keynote presentations or workshops, run live polls. And regularly at the top now about the biggest stressor is uncertainty, and that can come from all sorts of different areas, it come from your home life, your finances, but it also work plays a really important role there, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah. And that is a key feature of effective leadership is keeping calm under pressure, obviously,
Yeah.
but sharing that that kind of, I guess, clear vision of where we're going and what we're looking to achieve. I think it's also important to remember that we aren't perfect as CEOs and leaders. we make mistakes. So part of that is also sharing when you make those mistakes, and that we're only human. Because I think sometimes, like you say, referring to being your own therapist, while I
Mm.
agree with that, but I also think that we we're only one person. We're not superheroes, and we also need time to recharge our own batteries in however way that looks for an individual.
Yeah. And humility goes a long way, doesn't it? When you admit you don't know everything, but you need other people to be part of it. People step up, don't they?
Yeah, that's right, and it can be challenging, I think, because it isn't really the traditional approach to say I made a mistake in front of large group of people. When often you, as the leader, they're looking to you for all the answers. But
Yeah.
as you say, if you admit that while despite your best judgment, this ended up not being the right decision, I think you then that humility generates a lot more respect, and then people are more likely to work with you, to follow you, and
Yeah.
and achieve with
I
you.
came across some really interesting research from Gallup over the last 6 years, and they found that even in the first year of COVID, people were more sure about what they had to do. I guess people thought maybe they were over communicating or, doing all these sorts of things, but they had a better idea. And there is less clarity now than there was in the first year, quite a bit less than the first year of. Does
That
that?
makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, because we were forced to slow down, weren't we? We were forced to reflect and yeah, look inwards, I suppose. So that self-reflection and insight was something we were all made to do, which wasn't natural for a lot of people. So it makes a lot of sense.
How would you suggest that leaders improve their clarity?
There's a few things I think, like obviously hurrying up slowly is one core thing, but also not admitting you may not know all the answers. So ask your teams. Something we also potentially don't do enough of is asking for feedback. So setting time aside after a major project or after an event or a crisis, and looking at what worked well, what didn't, what could potentially be done differently, and how next time, and be open to receiving that feedback. Because if you receive that constructive feedback, it will open up mutual respect and understanding. The communication will become stronger between you, and you can become a better leader.
I heard one of my previous interviews, David, he was the APAC CEO for Pearson, the publishing company. And he talks about how he would regularly ask in his one-on-ones, what are three things I do that frustrate me? And but he said, it takes a bit of courage to do it, but you really learn some really significant insight on how best to work with someone.
Exactly.
Have you thought of other ways that you can sort of tap into people and help them to be really honest and sometimes brutally honest?
I think like asking the question is absolutely the right step, but again, creating that environment where they feel safe to speak up, to say so, that would be probably the two big things. Making it, I guess, embedding it as a normal process. That's probably the other part, is rather than formalizing it as a review or a performance review or a formal structure, make it part of your everyday conversation. So that reduces the fear potentially to speak up to your leader, because it's obviously more difficult to tell your CEO you don't like what they're thinking as opposed to your peer. So normalizing it and demonstrating it. So that's the other part. And once you've received that feedback, actually act upon it. So we've all been in that situation where we've been asked to share feedback and then nothing happens. So showing that you've actually listened and taken it on board in some way, shape,
Yeah.
or form.
Yeah, it's a great tip. We were speaking before we came on air, and I mentioned I'd been in executive search, and I was fascinated by the number of different industries they'd been in. Would you mind giving our listeners an overview of the things or of your career and your career progression?
Yeah, for sure. So it was about 10 years ago. I had been working in management for quite some time across different sectors and felt like I had more to give, essentially. So founding Small and Mighty Group established a platform to work with leaders and companies around the world. It was also at the time where remote working wasn't normal, and that, I guess, is part of my approach, my personality, is to look potentially of unconventional ways of doing things if it makes sense to do so.
Yeah.
So over that time, I've been fortunate to work with industry spanning medtech, biotech, worked a lot with engineers and scientists, but right through to manufacturing, retail, finance industry. So it's a real broad range of industries, size of companies from startups right through to multinational companies from Northern Europe to Kakadu. So I've definitely had the pleasure of working in lots of different diverse environments, working with lots of different leaders. But something we were just touched on before we went on to air was that despite all the differences, there's still those common threads in terms of what makes a good leader and what creates a caring culture and the direct impact with performance in relation to that.
Yeah. You've worked a lot with scientists and engineers. What do you see as their strengths and weaknesses? Is it a common one across the group, or is there some nuance there?
I think it'd be unfair to put them all in one bucket because, as we know, the stereotypes were probably quite different to the reality of some. Some are quite introverted, some are extroverts. So, but what I personally enjoy working with these more technical, complex industries is the knowledge. So, learning different nuances or opportunities or technology that could potentially save lives, which I've had experience with technology, which is life saving, has huge impact on planet and reaching net zero. So the technical aspects of that is really interesting. And then what I have had the privilege to do is to be able to absorb that and then translate that into a way that we can actually take to market, commercialize it, help translate to investors or customers to take that further. So
Yeah,
that's been very, very, very interesting.
yeah. Often it's very important to be able to simplify things, isn't it? I guess it comes back to
Exactly right.
your clarity point because,
Absolutely.
as I said, my wife's a professor and she has a very high bar for research. She says, "Show me the details, show me the details."
Yeah,
But to be fair, she has always strived to be able to simplify the message, and I think that's been very helpful
that's
because
right. Yeah,
because
because you can just get lost in the noise. That's
yeah,
essentially there's a lot of ambition out there, but ambition without clarity is exactly that's just noise. So
yeah,
that is probably sometimes working in these industries that can be their undoing of not progressing and not actually taking it to market is getting lost in the detail. So clarity in that instance is crucial, and that's obviously what I help them do.
I've also found AI to be a very, very good for clarity as well. I can put a whole page on there, but ask to simplify it to one sentence or simplify it to 3 words. And it does it incredibly well. I think there's big potential in simplifying things using AI, whichever mode that you use.
Yeah, absolutely. Used well, it can be extremely powerful. Something which was mentioned to me years ago, which it really stuck with AI is it's really important to have human first, human last, because
Mm.
with the huge rise in AI adoption, I think there's a large group of people that are very keen to use the tool, but really haven't quite articulated how. And so that's when we fall back in the noise and the lack of clarity. So understanding what problem it is this is looking to solve
Yeah.
is very much important to get that clarity, and also making sure it's obviously facts checking. So you still need that human last look over things to go, is this correct? Have we lost the
Yeah.
meaning somewhere in the mix?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good point. I've never heard that said before, human first, human last. But I've sort of intuitively used that because I, might have something summarized and what have you, brought it down to, 200 words. But then I tend to read it and say, does this sound like me? And in many cases it doesn't. So,
Exactly.
sometimes just different words.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
sometimes, not often these days, but there can be something completely wrong.
That's right. And again, it's taking that moment, that couple of moments to pause and go, does this make sense?
Mm.
And we've all heard about some high profile consultancy firms which have got caught out by using AI incorrectly, and there's been mistakes and whatnot in that. So it's just those few moments or, after even an hour to check can save you a lot of it later. Exactly, exactly right.
I think
And
the example,
reputational damage, exactly.
I
Yeah,
think the example you talked about, the bill was for 400,000, they had to reduce it to 130,000 or something. So, yeah, just by not properly checking the back page and the references, yeah, it's a wake up call for all of us
that's
that
right. Yeah,
we
yeah,
can't accept anything there.
yeah. But it's
You,
part of our. But I
sorry,
was
go
just
on.
going to say, it's a part of our life now. Really, is digital transformation and the tools we get presented to. Like years ago, it was when social media came on the stage. That was groundbreaking. We weren't really sure how to navigate that. So we're definitely on a learning and adoption curve, and
Mm,
it's good to have these conversations around it.
yeah. Have you ever had any, severe setbacks in your career?
I don't think I'd necessarily call them setbacks. There was times where actually it's something I often do, which is stop and pause and reflect, kind of calibrate things on track. And it's something I've spoken with others about is when you have that feeling or you might be feeling like having a bit of a crisis, is it's actually a good sign because it's telling you, it's your internal compass saying something's not quite right, something probably needs to change. So probably that time was when, before I established Smaller Mighty Group, was when it didn't really feel like I was maybe making the mark I was wanting to on the world, so to speak. But that
Mm.
was a good opportunity to pause and again use that self insight and reflection and challenge it a little bit to help get you back on track.
It's always a big move to go from, an employer situation to self-employed, which, you've gone through. Was that a hard transition to make?
I think retrospectively there was a lot of challenges and they, as you say, if you know what you know now, you'd probably do things a little differently, but it's also exciting. So it's not, I'm not someone who would take the normal path, as they say, the roads less traveled is a lot more windy, but often I find a more exciting one. So
Mm.
yeah, there's definitely been challenges, but lots of rewards and very happy to have learnt what I have along the way and the people I've met and it's been very valuable.
Yeah. I saw in one of your roles previously, it may well have been a consulting role as a leadership capability group for Specsavers in Europe. How,
Yes, yeah.
how did you come to get that position, and what were some of the changes you had to make when you were on that path?
Well, I guess over the years, as most organizations do, we grow and we scale. So
Mm.
in the beginning, year one, obviously it was just myself and there was one other person, and then we grew to a team of a bit over 25 people. So as as we sort of our capability grew, our market awareness grew, and gratefully attracted some really interesting clients like Specsavers Northern Europe. So we adapted. One obvious big one is time zone differences, so working across time zones, and that really forced us to think about our way of working. So we're already working remotely, but then working outside the normal 9 to 5, and how to do that without burning ourselves out was one thing we really had to look at. So, but yeah, those types of roles, it's been really great because I've been fortunate to be able to take on interim CEO roles like with TechSite recently, and similar ones like you mentioned with Specsavers, where we can really get in and rather than just creating the strategy, we actually get in and implement and execute.
Yeah. The time zone one is a really significant challenge. How do you find the best way to work that?
It depends obviously where in the world you are. So I
Yeah, of
remember
course.
having a meeting in Iceland at close to midnight with a client in, Adelaide. So I think the key is to remember again you're only human, so you need to make time to rest and restore. And as I mentioned, we don't have auto recharge batteries as leaders, so making that time. But also a key part of it is setting boundaries and communicating those with your team, with your clients, so they understand and sticking to it. So often we can set boundaries. For example, I'm not looking at my emails. I'm not taking meetings between these times because I need some sleep. quite
Yeah.
quite reasonable, but actually sticking to them. So those are things that I think are important to do.
It's really interesting you say that because there was a well-publicized case last year, and it was a workers' compensation case. The company was Cobar Mining, and they had two accountants in Australia that reported to a finance head in Switzerland. And it became incredibly challenging for them. They complained to their boss, and they virtually said, "We'll just sort it out. You should be able to manage time." Anyway, it ended up leading to them, complaining about it with some of the outside bodies, and then it was fully investigated. And what they found was it wasn't just surprise about just two people in the organization. It was about not having clear roles, clearly defined roles, clearly defined things you could say no to, not say that to. But the company ended up having to spend, or was committed to spending $1 million to fix it, to sort it out. And that was, doing some of the basic things like having proper position descriptions, having people go through assessment to see if they're using their strength in those sort of roles. So we know intuitively that it's bad with time zones if we don't manage it properly. But this has actually led to a legal case, which led to a very big payout.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm not sure if it's that exact one, but I've also heard of similar. So it's often the simple things, like you mentioned, position descriptions that get missed. And to be a caring CEO, these are fundamental things. So that, in terms of causing stress and burnout among staff, having that clarity is a great way to help prevent that. I recall working in a team and talking with one of the staff members that they felt that they were expected to work all the time because they had an office in South America. So they just hadn't had the manager hadn't had the opportunity to talk to them and say, actually, no, that's not what we're expecting from you. So just having the communication open to be able to explain what the expectations are can also go a really long way.
Yeah, you mentioned TechSite, and you became a co-CEO there. How did you sort out who does what when you're a co-CEO?
Yeah, it was a bit of a non-traditional approach we took. So I'd actually been working with the company through Small Mighty Group for, I think, about 5 years prior to that. So it was a bit of a natural evolution. And where the team had got to is there was quite a strong lot of skills in research and obviously science-based technical skills. But where there was a gap was commercialization and the more strategic focus. So it reached a point where the technology was ready to be taken further and taken to market, essentially. So that's where having clear roles, clear areas as a co-CEO worked really well. So my co-CEO was a scientist, had a very strong technical background, which was very complementary to mine, which was much more business and commercial focused. So that worked really well.
It's a win-win.
Exactly right. And there's been quite a few, actually, I've heard over the years. It obviously doesn't work for everyone. It requires a lot more, probably, self-insight and emotional challenges potentially than if you were just on your own. But even I was just reading a book recently, Conscious Capitalism, by, I'm looking at it here, John Mackay and Raj Sisodia, hope I said that right. And he's co-CEO of Whole Foods Market. So that is obviously a huge American organization. So there's definitely some examples out there that work really well.
Yeah. What do you do when you're not working? What's something that you love doing, recharges your batteries, got nothing to do with work?
Well, the good thing with the way I do work is I can blend two of my passions, and that is travel. So and it's probably a way that, as we've moved from being very, I think years ago, it was very focused on having work life and personal life as
Mm.
separate. More and more, I think today they're blended. So, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So, what I've learnt to do is learn how to integrate the two, but have a focus on each when they need to be. Because if you're multitasking, or if you're trying to focus on both, you're not really presently there. So while we are going, like if I go to Europe, for example, for work, it's taking the time to go see some sites. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely part of what I enjoy doing. Or even if it's just, I'm going to say just, if it's to Adelaide or to Melbourne, and seeing what's around and going to a gallery or something like that.
Yeah, I love to travel as well. And I really don't like the term work-life balance because it implies that life is good, work is bad. But
Exactly.
but for many people, and I'm certainly one of those, and I think you are as well, work's something that is really important to us. We get a sense of purpose from it. We use our strengths and hopefully make a difference. And I wish, that was more widely embraced. And maybe it will be as time goes on, because I think it is just a very, very healthy way to do things. And, my wife, Karen, her conferences has gone all over the world. So we often do something, following a conference.
Yeah.
There was one in Lisbon about 5 years ago. So we decided to do the Portuguese Camino, which starts in Porto and finishes up in Santiago. And it was such a contrast for her, because she was presenting at the conference in a scientific forum and paranoid about it, everything's correct and not correct. But then just to be able to switch off, not even have a phone, during the day, it
That's
was
right.
a total relief. And we're both lucky like that. We do both work hard, but we do it in I think
Yeah.
a way
And
a way that works.
yeah, that's right. And when you enjoy what you do, when you feel that purpose in your work, it's obviously not doesn't feel like work when you're enjoying what you're doing. So creating a culture in your organization where it does feel nice to be there, then you're not going to burn out as quickly and need those resets and recharges as much potentially.
If I asked three people that know you well what your strengths are, what would they say?
Three people to get these people in my mind now. One would probably be, well, that I genuinely care. So I genuinely care about my clients, the people we work with, the team, and what we do. So that's core to my purpose, my personal purpose, and also the work that I do. And also, I am open to being challenged, and particularly my biases. So we've all got biases. It's important to recognize these and understand these, and I think people would also say I'm happy to be challenged and reflective of that.
Fantastic. And it is interesting, the care thing. Often I ask people to reflect on, what's been about their best team, whether it's this team or previous team when they worked at McDonald's, or even for a sporting club, a sporting team, and what made it different. And generally three things come through, when I have people vote for it. One is we cared about each other. We had each other's back, and that's, I guess, we can be frank and honest and challenge each other, and that's well. And we encouraged each other. And yeah, those three areas. And, what you describe is very closely aligned to that. There's also the Gallup research, the Q12 engagement survey. And one of the statements is, my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. Not even does, seems to care about me as a person. But the more people that strongly agree with that statement, the higher the productivity, profit, customer service levels, and the longer people stay in the organization. So it's not a soft skill anymore, is it? It's
Absolutely not. Yeah,
sincerely a strong skill. And, that's what we have to keep championing, that cause.
exactly. Like you're dead right. It's not a soft skill, and I would say it's actually an essential business skill, because if people feel that their manager, their CEO, their team cares, they will feel that sense of belonging and purpose, as we were discussing earlier, which has enormous ripple effects.
Mm. If you had the opportunity to teach something to the world in a simple way, in a clear way, what would you like to teach the world?
Probably returning back to what we were discussing earlier would be the importance of and how to hurry up slowly, and really helping people understand that, and probably early on in their careers. So if when you're first starting out, you feel a lot of pressure to perform and do things at speed, that understanding that speed doesn't always equal success. I originally, when I was younger, actually growing up and watched my dad build and restore cars and race cars. So I watched him racing, and when I got a little bit older, he actually taught me. He actually said, maybe you should have a go at being behind the wheel, Tara. So I said, okay, let's give it a go. And what I learned from that was actually how to be strategic and under pressure, how to take calculated risks, and also how to rep slowly, essentially. So to speed doesn't always get you there, but it's how you take the corners and the challenges that gets you there.
So true. I went on a long walk on Sunday, and I thought I knew where I was going, but I went in a different entrance to the national park. And I thought I should be able to figure it out. Yeah, I just walked in this way and got tougher and tougher and tougher and bigger cliffs and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, why didn't I look at the map when I went back at the start rather than just
Yeah.
why did I hasten slowly?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Sometimes the ambition and the enthusiasm gets the better of us, and I think we're all guilty of that. That's we're not perfect, that's for sure. But yeah, part of the journey, isn't it?
It is.
And sometimes you find different things you wouldn't expect along the way.
That's right. That's right. And I even wrote that down as a reflection. I didn't use the word to hasten slowly, but it was something like that.
Yeah.
Check in regularly or something like that, I think it was.
Or take your phone.
Yeah, I'll take it back. Yeah. It's been a real pleasure catching up, Tara. Our time's gone so quickly, and I love how succinct you are in your answers and the things that you found have really, really worked for you. But I always finish with the same question, and you alluded to it earlier, and that is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
I would say you're on the right track. It's it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. So make sure you keep some fuel in the tank for yourself and enjoy the journey.
What great advice. Thanks so much for being part of the Caring CEO, Tara.
Thank you very much for having me.